Jeff McMillan, the former head of AI at Morgan Stanley. Jeff believes we are at the tipping point where companies are either going to learn how to adopt AI and they're going to thrive, or they're basically going to be on a slow death march because of their inability to adapt. What we've done is we've distilled down some of his best ideas from the conversation and talked about why he was so excited about what was happening that he actually left Morgan Stanley to go work with other companies on helping them make this transition. You've got the most unlikely AI background in a lot of ways. You graduated West Point, you worked in the Army, have a degree in economics, if I'm not mistaken, and that led you to running AI at Morgan Stanley. If you don't mind just giving us a minute or two on that journey, it would be great just to orient everybody.
So first of all, Keith, thanks for having me. And second of all, I have no idea how I wound up where I am right now. As you mentioned, I was a young lieutenant who had gotten out of the military. And if you're familiar with veterans who are transitioning, there's lots of skills and leadership that you get from the military, but you don't really know how to do much of anything. And I think like many veterans, I struggled. I actually bounced around 2 or 3 jobs that I was neither good at nor enjoyed until I found my first job back at Morgan Stanley, which was an internal consulting group. And my first project was to clean up the customer information of Morgan Stanley's customer accounts. And what's funny at the time is I thought I was actually qualified to do that job when they assigned it to me. Little did I know that long-term capital would hit about 6 months later, and my little $2 million project became a multi-year, multi-million dollar project, and I became, for lack of a better term, an expert in data quality. And I only mention that because, first of all, that's the start for me, but it's really funny because back in the mid-90s, data quality was really important. And guess what? In 2026, data quality is probably even more important, and I don't think many organizations have progressed much further than they have in the last 20, 30 years. But we can talk about that maybe later. My career is sort of a career of the growth of analytics and data. I worked at Merrill for a while. We used data to understand what clients were doing and how to drive more value with our research. And then in 2009, I went to work at Morgan Stanley. I had this very simple idea that we could use data to drive more effective targeting to our clients using machine learning algorithms. And this was, '09, so it was sort of the early days of machine learning. And, honestly, that took me 9 years to do. And it wasn't until 2018 that we released the first algorithmically driven recommendation engine for financial advisors, which we called Next Best Action. I kept sort of looking back and saying, wow, when you put really good content into these algorithms and you have really smart employees, in this case financial advisors, and you give them the right day at the right time, really good things happen. And then in March of 22, so 4 years ago, almost to the day, myself and a few other leaders at Morgan Stanley were sitting in a room in Palo Alto, meeting with a bunch of startups. And one of the 8 startups that we met today was a small unknown company called OpenAI, led by, at the time, this unknown guy named Sam Altman. And we became the first customer of OpenAI, and we became the first organization to deploy anything in production. And what I would say, Keith, is I'm not the smartest engineer in the world. I'm certainly not an engineer at all. But what I've tried to do, and where I maybe, if I've had any effectiveness in my career, I've sort of looked at that inflection point between business people trying to solve a problem and emerging technologies and connecting those dots in a way that drives business value. 2 years ago, I became the first head of AI at Morgan Stanley, which I served on, for 2 years before recently leaving the firm to do my own thing. So that's kind of my life story in 5 minutes.
So just to jump back to 2022, that's interesting. When you became the first customer, what were they selling back then? And why did you guys choose to buy it?
I'm not sure they knew what they were selling exactly. I think what they were looking, like many startups, they were looking to develop a partner or partner relationships. They, like many firms, were early in their maturity cycle. So, the things that you need to do to sell to an enterprise customer, entitlements, BYOK, right? All the information security issues, those were things that, I think they were grappling with, and they were looking for a partner. So I think what were they looking for? They were looking for a partner. What were they selling? They were selling GPT-3. That was the product at the time, and that was 7 months before ChatGPT hit the transom, and we had our ChatGPT moment like back in March, right, 4 years ago, and if you think about financial services, we move a lot of information across a lot of different channels, and it was clear that this technology, although again clearly undefined, uninformed in many ways, would be very helpful. And actually, the first use cases, we spent a lot of time thinking about the first use case, and our first use case was a simple bot for the financial advisors to help them find information in real time as they were talking to clients about any number of a million different topics. Two comments. One is it ended up being incredibly useful and impactful, and two, it was incredibly challenging and difficult to actually deploy that in an enterprise solution, given the nature of the new technology and just the lack of understanding and the governance and all that other stuff that was necessary to be successful.
Flash forward 4 years, it's 2026. You just wrote a couple of weeks ago an article or a framework, I guess, that really breaks down enterprise AI into 6 layers. And I'm assuming that based on the learnings that you had as part of sort of this rollout. I'm wondering if you don't mind just walking us through those layers for a second, because it really resonated with me when I read it. It all made a lot of sense.
There were 2 drivers. One is, part of my job is I really am trying to just educate people and raise the literacy of our society, because I think a well-educated, responsible group of professionals in this world will be better fiduciaries of this technology than ones that are not. So my goal is to hopefully make people smarter, to include myself, in a world in which this technology is moving very quickly. That's point number one. Point number two is everyone is focused on 2 things. They're focused on vendor or own built solutions, applications, and they're focused on models. And what, in my own personal experience, those are the visible things, and they certainly get the hype. That's not where the ultimate long-term value is going to come from. Particularly, if you're only looking to deploy 6 bots in your organization, sure, go ahead, pick a model or pick 2 models and pick 3 applications and go to work. But what happens when my organization or your organization has 20 or 200 or 2,000 or 20,000? And I don't believe I'm exaggerating in any manner, shape, or form that in the next 10 years, Fortune 500 firms are going to have tens of thousands of agents that are going to be talking to each other. And if you believe that to be true, which I fundamentally believe, and the timing we can argue about, you need to have an infrastructure that is scalable and is able to manage the growth of that infrastructure in a controlled and responsible way. So what does that mean? That means first and foremost, you need an accessible data layer, which, by the way, I probably have done 30 CEO conversations in the last 2 months. Everyone's data is a problem, and it's either a data access problem or it's a data quality problem. And the point is, AI doesn't solve that just by putting it on top. You actually have to do real stuff to make that work. So first of all, you got what I'll call your foundational layer. Then you have what I'll call your data accessibility layer, which is your models, your RAG infrastructure, your knowledge graphs. And again, we could talk a lot about that. But the point is that AI does better when the information is structured in a certain way. Just throwing a bunch of PDFs into a database doesn't necessarily drive value. The third is what I'll call the governance and control layer, which, by the way, no one's talking about. You need a mechanism to entitle the right information to the right people, to essentially make sure that the model is doing what you want it to do and not doing what you don't want it to do. And that needs to be very explicit. The fourth is the models, right? And by the way, you can get 1 model, 2 models. Most firms are using more than 1 right now. But I will tell you, you're not going to fail because you don't pick the right model. All the models are brilliant. They're so much more advanced than we as a business are. It's not even worth arguing about. The fifth layer is the other piece that I don't think gets enough play. And I know we talk about agents, but what I like to talk about is what I'm going to call the agentic orchestration layer. So if you think about the world that we're moving into, you're going to need this orchestration tool to be able to not only do the individual tasks that you want the AI to do, but to do those tasks across the organization. And if you have more than one of these, what I'm calling orchestration layers, you're going to get yourself into a mess, because the compliance tool is not going to talk to the risk tool, and the risk tool is not going to talk to the financial tool. And we can talk about the right vendors, and there's hundreds of them in this space right now, and I'm not even here to sort of argue about that. But what I will say is that organizations need to be very thoughtful about that single agentic layer and building that in a way that scales. And then finally, you have applications, right? And those applications, the build versus buy decision is a lot more complicated than it used to be. I think people are going to build a lot more than they used to because of the ease of the solutions. But even if you are buying, you're still going to want the thing that you buy. One of the criteria is to fit on that agentic layer. So those are what I'll call the 6 layers. And there's actually one, what I'm going to call horizontal layer, which is really your monitoring and evaluation observability, right? You're going to need a tool that essentially is able to sit across all 6 of these components and essentially watch what's going on, being able to understand when things break, understand how you're going to fix those things, being able to demonstrate that you know why you got the answers that you got. And whether that's internal needs or regulatory, I don't really care. You still need to be able to, and be able to defend that your system is operating in a way that is consistent with your expectations. Now, the good news there is that you can actually use AI to look at the AI, which is a pretty powerful capability. But I think the point when I'm talking to my customers and leaders, I'm really emphasizing this 6-tiered approach. And it's not like you just go out and buy the whole thing. It's pieces and it's messy and whatever. But I think as a strategy, organizations really need to think about these layers and that horizontal piece and starting to build that out in a structured way.
A lot of focus is on that model layer, and the press certainly likes to talk about the model layer. The application layer, ultimately, how important is it to pick a vendor that can scale horizontally because it'll create interoperability? I mean, what are your thoughts on, okay, we're going to go with I think it's Sarah in customer service, right? And they're going to do it, and then they're going to go everywhere. Or do you think it doesn't matter for where we are today?
I mean, so first of all, this is, if you're in the application layer, if you're a vendor in the application layer, you're trying to move down the stack. So you've already built out your agentic framework. If you are one of the data providers, you're trying to move up the stack and creating an agentic layer.
Right. And if you're a cloud services company, you're trying to do all of it.
And that's right. If you're a cloud services company, you're trying to do all of it. So, which, by the way, if I'm advising a firm, I am going to tell them to do that, because I don't know how else you're going to compete unless I think what will likely happen is that there will be n number of models. You're not going to have that many. You're going to have n number of agentic orchestration layers. Now, those could be from Azure, they could be Amazon, they could be Anthropic. I'm not here to pick the winners. And then what's very likely, similar to like we have the Apple Store and the Google Store, I can imagine a world where there's a handful of agentic players in the space. And then if you are a vendor solution that wants to build something in a specific vertical, you will just build it in the context of that framework. So when you come to me as a customer, I'll say, are you certified by the MCP protocol of XYZ infrastructure? And you will say, yes, I am certified. I meet all the protocol standards and I work very well in their stack. And if you don't, I won't be able to do business with you. So I could imagine a world where we have a few number of agentic solutions, a few number of models, and then that there's a lot of mix and match underneath it in terms of the data set themselves. Maybe the governance gets tied into the agentic frameworks, probably does, but you've got more flexibility on the applications so long as they are built in a way that's structured for that protocol that you've defined.
So just for those who aren't familiar, can you explain the MCP?
MCP is Model Control Protocol. It actually came out of Anthropic. And, the way I kind of describe it, and I wrote a piece on this recently as well, the 1930s, and you can fact check me on this, but there were 27 different gauges of railways in the United States. So by the way, if you want to read about like the AI boom, read about the railways. It's almost the same story. The parallels are actually quite funny in some ways. And it wasn't until industry, government, regulators got together and said, this is how wide a railway gauge is going to be. And oh, by the way, we're going to have time zones in 3 parts of the country. I mean, at one point there was like 30 different time zones. Like you could be in Stanford and I could be in New York City and it would be, 3 hours difference. It wasn't until that, and then they established some safety standards that you were able to drive to Florida to New York on one train, right? And that was a massively disruptive concept because that's when capital formed. And if you think about MCP as the gauge for AI. It's the language that allows these disparate AI solutions not just to talk to each other, but to talk to applications. Because when you get into an autonomous or semi-autonomous world, the AI does the thinking, but then it needs to act with machines, databases, applications, websites to action the work. And think about MCP as the common language that we can all use so that when I talk to you, I know who you are as an application. I know what you do. I know the information that you can and can't provide me, the entitlements that I have access to, maybe even the financial economics of it over time. And what I'll say is, this is a whole other conversation, there is still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done around these protocols on an application by application level to make them really effective, both within organizations and outside of organizations. But I think over time, you're going to see a closing of standards. And whether that comes from governments, industries, or somebody else, I'm not really sure. But I think that's going to be super important as we try to really start to scale and commercialize agentic solutions.
You're at this point where you're a leader there's the Morgan Stanleys of the world, and then there's a $150, $200 million business. And each of those problems are very different. Sort of take each of those spectrums. If you're looking at this layer, then you assume, based on what you've said, that data, you have to start somewhere foundationally with data. Where do you go next?
Right now, there are no proven players that will work across the 7 stack, right? Now, there's lots of startups with no customers that have built these solutions. So what do? You work with the hyperscalers that are in place today, who are bringing it together, but bringing it together slowly, the Microsofts of the world, Google or AWS. If I'm a $100 million business, that's probably what I'm doing. Or I'm working very closely with one of my the Snowflakes and the Databricks of the world, right? Or I'm going to make a bet on one of the big SaaS providers, the ServiceNows, the Salesforces, because by the way, they all have the identical strategy. I'm not here to tell you who's going to win, right? I don't know, but I think you have to be very thoughtful. And what's unfortunate is picking 3 or 4 options is a bad option. I think you actually have to pick a provider that you think, even if not the A+ player right now, even if maybe they're the B or B- player, that you think that they've got the long-term durability and they're going to be around in 5 years. I would much rather pick a perceived legacy player that I know is going to exist in 5 years than the single greatest agentic solution in the marketplace. Because one, it's very hard to evaluate. I mean, I get calls all the time. They're like, my thing's the best thing in the world. I mean, I get that 3 times a day. It would take me a month to figure out if your thing is the best thing in the world. I have no idea, and I don't have the time.
Well, let me ask you a question before you jump ahead. Let's say it is the best thing in the world. How hard is it when you have an engineer that can do 500,000 lines of code a month for somebody to copy it at this point?
If you're a multi-billion-dollar company, yes. I'm not so sure if you're a $100 million company that you really want to be building, agentic frameworks for yourself. I think where you want to build potentially, and this is an important point, like I would recommend to people to buy an agentic infrastructure. And obviously they're not going to, people, I think we're beyond the point where people will argue that they're going to build their own models themselves. I think that's there's certain use cases, but putting aside a few of them, for the most part, I think you can use right now, assuming pricing stays the same, you can use any of the biggest players. I would similarly suggest that you buy an agentic framework because you're going to get all of these controls. You're going to get a monitoring framework. Sure, you could build that, but I don't think that's what you want to build. Where I think if I'm a developer, I want to think about that application layer. And I want to think about building the best client intelligence tool, the best sales and trading tool, the best investment banking presentation analysis tool, right? I would focus on using your proprietary knowledge and expertise and your proprietary data, and then leverage a generic model infrastructure and a generic agentic so that sort of 3, 4, and 5 spot, the governance and controls, the models, and the agentic layer, I personally, even if I'm a large firm, I'd probably buy it because it's so commoditized.
When you say agentic layer, just to be clear, like what are some of those companies? Let's just make sure everyone understands what those are.
Microsoft is building out a 3-tiered agentic layer. Companies like Manus is an agentic orchestration layer. ServiceNow used to be a forms company. They're becoming an agentic. Salesforce is now becoming, and let me be clear.
Arguably any big SaaS player at this point.
They're all becoming, because think about what I would describe as, okay, we have agents. Agents they don't just think, they act. But an agentic layer is a firm-wide AI orchestration capability that is able to not only manage work within a vertical, but it is able to manage work horizontally across an organization. Think about that. And the reason I talk about it as a thing, as opposed to just agents, is if you're the CEO of a multinational corporation, the value that your organization brings is the intellectual capital that's sitting in little pockets across the organization. And if you create an orchestration layer that really understands the work that people do, you will unlock value that you don't even know exists, because you will essentially be able to start to bring the intellectual capital and the individual decision-making of people to bear across. You could have agents that could be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, solving problems for you with resources outside of your 4 walls of your business area in 50 other countries around the world, completely independent of you knowing any single person in that group. Like that's what I'm talking about, an agentic orchestration layer. And I'm not even talking just about the work. I'm talking about like the intellectual capital, but the work matters too.
So if I'm a $500 million business even, I get that. In practical terms, if I'm a multi-billion dollar corporation, I'm sure that there's a head of customer success who says, I really want this solution. And there's a head of something that says, I really want this solution. So is that vision even possible in the way actual human nature is operating in these companies?
I think now we're talking about why leadership matters so much here. There are some CEOs that I talk to that understand this and understand that this is an existential opportunity for their business. Those CEOs are very switched on, and they really understand this vision, and they are aggressively pushing this concept of an orchestration framework for their organization. And candidly, I feel very strongly, the ones that are able to do this and the ones that are able to not allow that one special interest to buy the one best CRM system that's in the marketplace. Candidly, give me the B solutions across 100 different things that's on the same agentic framework than the A+ solutions that are not. 100 times out of 100. Because it's the connectivity. And the other point I'll make, Keith, there's the analogy, and I apologize for repeating myself. The world has given us a Ferrari, and most of us are driving circles in a Walmart parking lot. and we don't even know how to turn the air conditioner on and don't know how to play the radio, right? Like everybody wants the best solution. The most mediocre solution with a good organization that has good frameworks in place and a decent data set will crush it 100% of the time. You don't need the best model. You don't need the best agentic framework. What you need is you need smart people who know how to deliver this stuff. And my point is that it's more of an organizational management, to your point, to these issues of like, well, I want my tool. No, I want my tool. And the ability to, by the way, not only do that, but also to share capabilities, right? Like you don't need more than one document processing tool in an organization. You should pick one, pick the best one you can find. I don't care. And then make everybody use it as opposed to letting all the businesses. Now, is that the nature of large multi-billion-dollar corporations? Absolutely not. And I think that's the challenge. But that's where, again, that's where I think the CEO matters in this equation so much, because if he or she is really thoughtful about those decisions, I think they're going to have a massive advantage.
I think what you're implicitly saying, if not explicitly, is the solution itself may or may not matter as much as the approach. And if I'm imagining, though, you're a CEO, you're on an investor call, your board's calling, they want to see some action. They want to see movement. Is the advice, go move, but don't move on 20 different fronts, move with a single partner?
I think, first of all, you have to believe in what I'm saying. You have to believe that a long-term consolidated orchestration framework with these components matters for your business. I think, first of all, you have to acknowledge that. Now, you can't wait 5 years for the mall to be built and everything. I mean, you got to deliver value. And I think so long as you are doing that in the context of a broader framework, and if you're going to take shortcuts, sometimes you will, then you just do it knowing that you're taking a shortcut and there might be the risk of having to rebuild something or rewire. So I'm not suggesting you wait. And by the way, I would actually suggest the opposite. I think, if I'm a CEO of a company, I tell them pick your 5 biggest, most important strategic initiatives and get in a room and ask yourself, 1, how can we make these things better, faster, cheaper? Number 2, if in 5 years we're blown out, how are we going to get blown out and what are we going to do about it? And then finally, what could we do tomorrow with Gen AI that we're not doing today that would improve our whole business model? I would ask those questions and I'd walk away with 5 projects. And I would just execute relentlessly. I'd take my best people out of their day jobs. I'd get my best technologist. I would be personally involved if I was a CEO. And I would look to drive real material KPI. And I would just do that in the context of the framework that we're talking about and knowing that things are going to evolve. There's going to be products that are going to win and lose. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think you just have to do it and do it thoughtfully, as opposed to just letting your organization buy a bunch of products that won't work in 3 years together because you haven't been strategic.
In 2018, you launched the first AI ML product. And then in 22, you started partnering with OpenAI. What metric did you look at after that 2018 implementation to say this is a success? And then as you got deeper and deeper in over the last 4 years, what were you looking at?
Listen, everyone's got a different objective, right? In the wealth business, and if you go back to 15 and 16, when there was a perception that the robo-advisors were going to essentially eliminate all of wealth management, and by the way, we intuitively felt that wasn't the case, but we didn't have any data. So I'd done a lot of work. And by the way, what I'm sharing is all public information, from prior, so I can certainly share it with you. What we found is that, we looked at 300 plus attributes on a, multivariate model. And the only thing that really mattered for success for a happy customer or a successful financial advisor was contact. I mean, I used to joke with the FAs that it took me, 3 years and 10 PhDs to figure out if you called your customers, you'd make more money than if you didn't. It's true. And if I walk into any branch, by the way, this is true for any company, and if I can see the financial advisors that have the most outbound phone calls per week, I guarantee you 6 or 7 of them are going to have the greatest net acquired asset revenue. Because even in 2018, and by the way, 2026, maybe, what happens in 28 or 29, I don't know, but today, the most valuable thing that financial advisors can do in any business is call their clients. But the problem is that they're weighed down with so many other things, right? They're managing portfolios, they're moving money, they're doing planning, right? So one, the strategy is how do you free up capacity? But two, how do you give them the ability to scale? Because when the Dow drops, 400 points, you can't pick up the phone and call every client. So you create a digital tool that increases their ability to velocity. And then what's the measurement? The measurement is one, is velocity of contact increasing, right? Both human and digital. And two, is that driving net acquired asset? Because it's not about revenue and wealth. Revenue comes, and it's not about whether you buy a bond or sell a bond. Like, that's not where people make money in financial advice. They make money by you staying with them over long periods of time and putting more money in, right, as you grow. And the only thing that matters is contact. And because contact matters, then we measure contact. And if you do that contact, then you'll basically drive more assets. So that's really was the key metric for next best action. And in terms of the other ones, some of them are efficiency plays. Are you doing a unit of code faster? And then is the question, do you use that unit to reinvest in more software development or not? Some of them are about how many PowerPoint or discounted cash flow models are you able to do in a day? And is that increasing? And again, do you use that capacity to develop more solutions for clients or to create more efficiency? A lot of it's about risk. I don't think that gets enough play. One thing that's great about AI is it reduces the standard deviation of quality in an organization and allows you to monitor stuff at scale. And then finally, which is the harder play, is just revenue. Are you producing a new product, a new service that you weren't producing before? And does the introduction of that service or product create incremental revenue for our business? But all these things are measurable, but candidly, most organizations really struggle with this kind of stuff. It's like, oh, it got better and we gave Copilot to everyone and people seem to like it. That's not really a strategy.
Well, that's interesting because as you were speaking, what I was thinking of is what time frame do you have to set realistically internally? Because I think a lot of the feedback I get from people is they did this project. The CEO is looking for accountability, which is something I know you believe in. And that could be on the cost side to reduce costs. It could be how is it impacting the business. But there is a time frame by which things have to bake.
For sure. And by the way, I actually have a slide on this that I do. I teach a class for executives and I talk about it. I think for most organizations, like year one is purely getting your feet underneath you, giving an enterprise tool to everybody, developing your guardrails and policies, teaching people how to prompt, and probably getting one or two projects done. That's year one. Year two is then saying to everybody, okay, every business, now that you've learned how to use the tool, I want you to do a project. So maybe in year two, you get 20 or 30. And then maybe by year three, you're sort of up and running with material. And because the thing is, it's almost impossible for me to come to somebody who's never used AI and say, okay, I want you to deploy something. I want you to deploy it effectively. And I want to know what your KPIs are. Like most people can't even spell AI. So to say you want material impact in like year one, I think it's like, it's like asking your 10-year-old to go dunk a ball, right? They just don't have the skills yet to do that. They need to mature. So I think people really do need to take a much longer time frame. And I think it is in the 3+ years before, we were at it for 4, right? And I would, again, I don't work there anymore, but I would like to think Morgan Stanley's in a good spot, but it didn't happen overnight. And by the way, the biggest challenge is not even technical. It's just organizational, education, awareness, and training.
And how much, if you're looking at a percent of a budget, how much budget or time would you put behind that?
Here's how I respond to that question. I don't think people should be spending any more technology dollars than they're spending today. I think what they should be doing is they should look at the technology dollars that they're spending, and they should be asking themselves, with the advent of generative AI, how does it change my investment? In many ways, Gen AI is actually cheaper to design and deploy. That being said, one thing I will say, Keith, and this is important, the piece that's missing in most organizations is that AI or generative AI is changing the way we design and develop software. So before, if you were the business guy and I'm the tech guy, you would write requirements documents and then you'd hand them to me and I write a technical specification and a user specification document. and then I would hand it to 20 developers, and then 6 weeks later, we would build it, and I'd give it back to you, and you would say, Jeff, this isn't what I wanted, and I'd say, well, you didn't explain it to me right, and then we'd circle through for a month or two, and then you'd run out of budget, and we would just call it a day, right? In 2026, you could actually, in some cases, you could completely build that solution all yourself, like completely build it without any of my involvement. Now, maybe you might need my help, maybe you won't, but let's just assume you could build it. The problem is most people in the business don't have actually the skill discipline to build that appropriately. They don't know how to prompt. They certainly don't know how to evaluate software solutions. And they don't have capacity. So what we've done is we've shifted this bubble to the business, but we haven't given them the training and the skills and the knowledge and the oversight to do that effectively. And so when you talk about budget, I mean, net, it's probably the same dollars, but you're probably, if you're really smart, your cost of software development is going down. So what you probably should be doing, and by the way, maybe you're not taking a head out at all, but you're shifting the resource capacity that has historically been developing software in the back, and you're moving those capacities closer to the business so that they have the knowledge, capabilities, and they're able to build this stuff in a responsible way.
So I totally agree with this idea that people don't know how to use the tools. And one thing I've discovered from having these conversations, a lot of companies are very strict on sort of shadow tools and paying for solutions. So how are people, if their companies aren't supporting them, if they're sort of banning shadow tools, supposed to develop the knowledge to be able to use these things when presented opportunities?
So I tell everyone, you have to give every employee an end user AI tool. And by the way, you're going to reduce your risk. People are like, oh, I can't give this. They're going to do something stupid. Well, guess what? They're already using Claude, and they're probably already uploading customer information.
Right.
So you want to reduce that risk, and you want them to do it. The other thing is that by putting it in your infrastructure, you can monitor it. I mean, very simple. Take one tool, and then throw another tool on top of it. Put your code of conduct in place, and say, you are a compliance officer at XYZ Corporation, and your responsibility is to monitor the prompting behavior of every employee that uses this system. So then take every input prompt, put every output prompt, and then dump it into another model and have it tell you what it thinks. Right? I mean, this actually reduces your risk profile, not increases it. Right?
Yeah.
So I think number one, you have to give, but I think the other thing is that you cannot think that giving people a tool is going to save you much money. Because what these generative AI tools do is they go after tasks. And very few of us in this world do one task all day long. Now, maybe if you're a developer, maybe if you're in a call center, right? Those are use cases. But most of us actually do 20 or 30 tasks a day. So if you take 50% of a task that I do, 8 minutes a day, even if it's across 50,000 people, you're never going to see that. But my argument is that these end user tools are not because they're going to save you money, but because they educate your workforce in the effective use of these technologies. And then by doing that, that's like what I'm talking about year one, get people using these tools, because the other thing that happens is that they start to say, geez, if I can do this little thing with an agent, in Copilot or GPT in Enterprise GPT or a project in Claude, I could, if I only had an API, and if I could wire that API into this service, and if I could connect to my CRM system in this way, wow, I could do something really interesting. And it opens up the aperture. And the point is that unless you know how to do this kind of stuff on your own, it's very hard to even think that way, which is why when I teach executives, one of the things I do, we spend 2 hours building. We actually sit in a room designing and building solutions, because that's the only way to effectively learn, and then it kind of opens up the opportunity.
You had one of the earliest and most controversial titles, which is this head of AI title, which people feel, I've posted a lot about this on LinkedIn, and people feel very strongly about this title. So one, I'd like to hear what you think of that, the importance of a role like that in most organizations today. And then interestingly, you had this title, which is very in demand, in my opinion, and you chose to walk away to go do something else. And so what did you see that made you want to leave?
So first of all, I've been in Morgan Stanley since 2009. I mean, it is home. And I worked for a gentleman named Andy Saperstein, who's the co-president there, and candidly is not only was a boss, a mentor, and a friend. Um, I mean, I love Morgan Stanley and I love the people there and have only the utmost respect. I mean, I really mean that, and there's no hyperbole there. But I would say two things. Number one, when I took the job, and I said this publicly, I said when I took the job, if I did the job right, I would be out of a job in 2 years. And part of the controversy of these roles is they're not permanent roles. They are temporary roles. They are because because people will argue, some people say, well, we have to centralize everything because we don't centralize everything, people are going to get out of control. And then the business say, no, we need to do whatever we want to do. And the answer is yes, you need to do both. You need to have somebody that is able to put your infrastructure in place, set the standards, establish the guardrails, put your evaluation frameworks, figure out what it means to how do I submit a project? What are the steps? Who approves it? What's the all that kind of stuff. And then most importantly, you need someone to teach the organization. And then once that's done, you need to give the organization the ability to add value. So I think number one, I saw myself, candidly, I worked myself out of a job. And by the way, I'm couldn't be prouder, right? I wasn't trying to hang on too long. And I'm very proud of where Morgan Stanley is and the work that we did. And by the way, they're in great shape. And I think they're going to do great things because the technology is diffused to the right people in the business to do that. But secondly, I saw an enormous gap in the level of awareness at the senior level. And it's not about the models. It's even not about the agentic layer. It's about, do senior executives really understand what this technology can do to their business and drive value? And then lastly, and I don't want to be too sentimental here, but I think this is a once in a generation technology, and what a privilege to be able to be part of the dialogue here, to drive. I teach at Columbia. We just had our event last week where I had 50 students build AI solutions in 3 weeks from scratch. Not a single one was a technologist, right? And to be able to sort of be part of this ecosystem where we're thinking about policy and education, I don't know, what an opportunity. So, for those reasons, one, my work was done, and two, I think there's a lot of work to be done outside. I decided to set up my little McMillan AI shop.
It's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. This was incredible. I can say from having talked to you for a long time now, most people should give you a call.
Well, Keith, you can find me on McMillanAI.com. Is this like an advertisement? McMillanAI.com. And what I would say is there's lots of good content on there, but there's also a Jeff bot. If you're interested in talking to the AI version of me, which has been trained on, I don't know, probably 4 years of content, every speech, every framework. By the way, Keith, you should ask all these questions to JeffBot and see if you get a better answer. You probably will.
I think that's awesome. I think I will. That's great.